last couple days, Saturday and really early Sunday morning, I kind of get into that place of opening up and say, okay, whatever shows up, shows up. So I was driving here this morning, and I decided to take a really odd route to the center, and that's a whole other story I'll talk about later. And I don't know if you know this, but Christian churches are really into these really flashy signs right now around town. And the religion of Vegas. So anyway, I'm sorry. Non-judgment place here. So anyway, one of the centers, one of the churches that has embraced this is over by the high school. And so I really came an odd way to church this morning, or to the center, and so I was driving by there. And on this sign, which I was reading, as I should have been driving, but I was reading, a Bible verse came up. And it was exactly what I needed for this morning. And so I pulled over really quick and I jotted it down. And I'm thinking about calling the minister there this week and thanking him thanking that person for putting that up there, because over here at Center for Spiritual Living, a metaphysical teaching center, I really enjoyed the fact that he gave me a verse. And I'm going to let him know that if he wants some Ernest Holmes, I'm his guy. So, okay. So I'll be glad to share that with him. Back in the 18th century, the British Empire and the Spanish Empire were desperately trying to establish their trade routes and get themselves settled in the Americas and figure things out. And so if you were a Spanish ship or captain, or you were a British ship or captain, very often you got out there, into what they considered to be the edges of the world. And as a military ship, what was happening was you were trying to kind of assert your authority, and you were trying to get involved in trade routes, and you were trying to make your presence known. And there were times where the British and the Spanish especially had these little skirmishes. They fought, okay? But they had little fights, not big ones. They had little fights all over the world. And so they would kind of take each other on, and they'd go into ports, and they'd terrorize each other, and they would do things. And very often these little battles were just ship on ship. And for both, for captains and crews of these ships, I mean, they were really out there. They were beyond the fleets. They were kind of doing their thing. And I'm not condoning that. I'm not condoning the politics of it or the geopolitics or anything. We all know how that worked out. But anyway, so there's a story about a British captain, and he was on the west coast of South America, around the Galapagos Islands. And so he was a long ways from home, and he was kind of playing tag and hide and seek with a Spanish ship. And the Spanish had done a lot to establish ports in South America, and so the British hanging out wasn't a very cool thing, but he was doing what he was supposed to do. So there's all kinds of islands along that coast. There's the Galapagos and all kinds of other islands. And so they were kind of playing tag with each other, and they get a couple shots off to each other, but who really wanted to get sunk out there on the west coast of South America type thing. So they were doing a lot of running and hiding. Also, the captain of the ship, being the guy, he was the ultimate authority on the ship, and so he had to figure things out about, like how to, where they should put ashore, where they can grab some fresh fruit so the crew didn't get scurvy, and yet they had to do that and avoid the mosquitoes and the wild animals and all those kinds of things. And if there were any ports around, what ports were friendly and not friendly. And he was looking out for the well-being of his crew, and he was trying to figure out how much do I want to engage in battle with this Spanish captain and things like that. So his crew, his junior officers, were all salty, seasoned officers who had been on the ocean for a long time, just like he had. And so they were talking constantly, and they would pull out their maps and their charts, and they would pull out their war manuals and their sailing manuals, and they would share their advice and share their opinions from all the years of experience. And sometimes the maps were a little bit dicey, because maps in those days were kind of hearsay or secondhand or just parts of information or things like that. So the British captain was trying to figure out his course of action over the next couple days, and he visited the charts, he visited the maps, he listened to those who had something to say, and he had some decisions to make. Well, this one night, it was just about dusk, and the person who had the watch, the junior officer who was actually steering the ship, actually it was an enlisted guy who was steering the ship, actually had his hands on the wheels because officers didn't do that, but the junior officer was next to him to navigate. So the captain suddenly appears up on deck from his quarters, and he tells the enlisted gentleman to leave. He said, go get a good night's sleep, and he told the junior officer to leave, and the junior officer said, Captain, what are you doing? He said, I'm going to steer the ship for a while. What? The captain didn't do that. And he said, I want to steer the ship for a while, and we've set in this very sort of lazy course for the night to sail through the night in some open ocean, and I'm going to take the first watch. So the junior officer was concerned about the mental health of his captain. And he said, why are you doing this? Why are you doing this? And he said, because, he said, I need to have her speak to me. And so just go below and get a good night's sleep. I think that's really interesting. The captain wasn't saying, if we listen to the statement he was making, it wasn't that, the charts are wrong, the maps are wrong, everyone's ideas are wrong. He wasn't, He took all that into consideration. But there came a time when he said, basically, I need to be in a place where I am alone. I am alone with this. I am alone with this vessel. I am alone with the ocean. I'm alone with the stars. I am alone with the situation. I am alone and I am quiet and I am asking her to speak to me. I know that as a young person coming up in the religions I came up in, and I'm sure a lot of you can identify with this with different religious backgrounds, there is this idea that we as human beings have. And the idea is this: how then shall I live? And that idea can be a vast idea. It can be, who should I marry, and what career should I have, and where should I move to, and what does the next 20, 30, 50, 10, 5 years look like? It can be a big idea like that. Or it can be a small idea. It can be an idea that what is right in front of me right now, I need to navigate this. How shall I live in this place? And the religions I was raised in terms of that wisdom, and I love the metaphor of this story as far as the captain of the ship, because we are all the captains of our own ships, and we have at our disposal, we have these incredible religious writings, and we have these ideas, and we have these speakers, and we have these healers, and we have the doctrine and the dogma. And I'm not standing here today saying that there's anything wrong with any of that. There is nothing wrong with any of that. Our rich religious traditions, our rich doctrines, the mystics and those incredible people who have come before us, and some of them are in the world today, who seem to be dialed into some other frequency. There's nothing wrong with that. But in terms of where I was at any given moment of how then shall I live, I was given basically one voice. I was given one sort of God to listen to, one ultimate voice. And that voice was outside of me. And that voice was the God that I was taught about was the God that was male, that was detached, that was somewhere else. And maybe there were times where I couldn't dial into that frequency. I remember as a kid wanting so much to, to sit down and have a chat with God. I mean, can you come on down here? I mean, can we sit in the park or something, and can we talk? And I expected for God to show up in a certain way. And then, like many of you, as I began to expand my spiritual education, I found out, for example, in the first place that I really discovered this concept was the Native American concepts. And the Native American concepts, and as someone who was raised in Western Christianity, I was always told, well, those people have all kinds of gods. Now, we only believe in one God, and they have all kinds of gods, and so they worship all kinds of gods. But what I found out with my education was, it wasn't that there were all kinds of gods. It was that God can show up in all kinds of ways. It is the idea, I was reading this week about the Hopi, and the Hopi see a God as something that they relate to as a woman and as a man, sort of like the grandmother and the grandfather, but they don't really believe that that's all God is. They believe that that's a personality of God, that they believe that God runs in and through all of us. But there is this personality, and so what the Hopi say is, sometimes in any given situation, there are times when I might need God to show up in a particular kind of way to open itself up for me. And for this British captain, it was the feel of the ship, it was the feel of the sea, it was the feel of the stars. And ultimately, I mean, how's the story go? Where did this God ultimately showed up? Well, it showed up within. It showed up as a voice as a feeling, as a vision. I mean, it shows up for people in all kinds of ways. Some people have, they have visual things that show up for them. Some people hear voices. Some people have strong feelings. Something that washes over us, something that we open ourselves up to. When the captain came onto the bridge and took the wheel, which is something he wasn't even supposed to do, that was somehow beneath him, but he took the wheel and just wanted to open up to that incredible voice, to something within, to a truth within. It was like this morning, this is a relatively small example, but I mean, I was driving here, and we all get into our ruts in terms of how we drive and things like that. And I was going to take one of my paths to the center, and I just something came up. Just take a different path. Just see something different. Look at something different. Get another glimpse of the town on a Sunday morning. And I go down this road, and there it is. There it is. This week, I'm doing this Myrtle Fillmore class, and she talks about this idea in her work, and she puts it really eloquently in her own way. She talks about the ideas of being led. In fact, she says in her work, and you have to understand that her book, Healing Letters, these were personal letters she wrote to people. And after she left this world, someone decided to pull them together and edit them down and stick them in a book. And so what's really sweet about this is she's talking to someone, a good friend, I don't know who it is, and she said, sometimes I think you try too hard. And I think that you just need to relax and allow Spirit to guide you. So what spiritual principle is that? That's the spiritual principle of emptying out. That's a spiritual principle of, and it's very often taught in meditation and other ways, to empty ourselves out. We've all heard this story a million times. The Zen master who, asks the student, show me your teacup, and so the student gives them the teacup, and so the Zen master just pours the tea, and pretty soon it runs all over the place. What's the object of the lesson? The student looks at the Zen master. What are you doing, master? And he says, I can't put any more tea in your cup because it's full. It's the same thing. What Myrtle Fillmore is doing is she's saying, stop trying so hard. All this information, all this doctrine, all this dogma, all this stuff is great, but stop trying so hard. Allow yourself just to empty out a little bit. Now, we know what psychology tells us is that, we can never become truly empty. There is absolutely no way to completely shut down the mind. And so, does the captain standing at the window, is the captain standing at the wheel, is he completely empty? No, but he takes that information and he just kind of pushes it aside. He just kind of suppresses it. He just kind of puts it over on hold. And that's what Myrtle Fillmore is saying. And this morning, instead of, I need to drive there a certain way, I need to take a certain road, I need to be a certain thing. In other words, this has to look a certain way. And Spirit said, no, it doesn't. It doesn't have to look like anything. Just listen. Just give yourself over. Just empty out. Don't have an opinion. Wouldn't that be amazing if we didn't have an opinion? That's what the junior officer on the bridge of the ship had. He had an opinion like, the captain's not supposed to do this. What are you doing? And the captain says, this is a time to not have an opinion. This is a time to just allow something else to come in. What's interesting to me about the idea and there are a lot of spiritualities like this around the world and throughout the cultures, of having the different faces and ideas of God. And I was thinking about those the most ancient of people, the people going way back, who started these ideas, these spiritual ideas. And I was thinking about, what they were opening up to, the questions that they had. What are we looking for in terms of some kind of information to live our lives? Are we looking for guidance? Are we looking for direction? Are we looking for information? Are we looking for sustenance? If we can put a face on God, who would we like that information from? Some information lends itself better to other sources. There are some things in life I would rather hear from my grandmother than my grandfather. There are some things in life I'd rather hear from my grandfather than my grandmother. There are certain things in life I would rather hear from a teacher, from a friend, from a lover, from a relative. There are certain things I want to hear in this world in my life that just seem to come from a mysterious place. There are some things I would like to hear, and there are some things I would like to see. There are some things I would like to discover, and there are some things I would like to be shown. And so the Native Americans, they basically said, they put all that out there, and they said, who would I like to hear from? How would I like to hear this? Would I like to discover it? Would I like to be shown? Do I want this to raise up in my thoughts? Do I want it to raise up visually? I'm someone who I tend to have feelings about things, like which way to drive. But this morning, there was an electronic sign on a Christian church that gave me a gift. And so is it up to me to judge that? No. Because that electronic sign was God. That was Spirit. The thought to drive a different way was God. It was Spirit. You see, we believe that Becky put this really well this morning. We don't believe that we are the whole totality, universal God. I am not the Lord of the universe. I am not the God. I am not some God somewhere on the throne. I don't want the job. I got my hands full with myself. I can't worry about the Middle East right now. You know what I'm saying? I'm worrying about this right here. But there is there is a piece of that energy that dwells within each and every one of us. And there is a piece of that energy that dwells all around us and through each and every one of you. You know, I heard a talk back when I was in Vancouver where a gentleman was talking about the historical the historical journey of the term namaste. And you know, I mean, all kinds of scholars got all kinds of ideas. I don't even know if this is true, but the dude was, you know, some stuff way back, and he said, you know, we think of namaste saying, you know, the God in me recognizes the God in you. But what he said was, if you go back far enough, what the term namaste means is a recognition of self. Like a mirror. And so we walk around and God is reflected back to us from every possible way. Now, the God of a good friend of mine is going to reflect back and say the God of a squirrel or the God of a tree, but it's still God. Or the God of an electronic sign or the God of a ship, or the God of the ocean, or the God of the stars. Myrtle Fillmore in her work says, you know, we owe it to ourselves, especially in this world where we have so much coming at us all the time. She says to step into that relationship with God. I mean, it's always there, but to go out of our way. In other words, that's what the captain of the ship was saying. He was saying, I need to stand on the bridge of this ship and really step into this relationship. God is always there, but I really need to come into this place and be really aware of it. It's the first two steps of prayer that we teach. God is all there is, and God is within me. God is all there is, and God is within me. And sometimes for myself, when I pray, that's as far as I get in my prayer. That's as far as I need to go. You know, I'm in a situation, I'm like the captain, I'm the captain of my own ship, and I'm trying to figure out how to deal with all these things. And sometimes I just simply need to know God is right here. God is here, and God is within me. And Myrtle Fillmore says that within that relationship, and she calls it communing with God, that we can open up. Have you ever been driving somewhere, and maybe you're going to a difficult situation? You know, you're going to an interview, you're going to a family situation, you're going to a situation where you need to comfort someone, or maybe there's a confrontation of some kind. Have you ever gotten in your car and turned off your radio and imagined God sitting next to you? And what that conversation would be like? Isn't that what the captain of the ship was doing? You know, on the ship there was the person steering the ship and there was the navigation officer. Well, for him there was no navigation officer, but was there? You see, the thing that, now let's get to where the rubber meets the road in this. The thing that happens is that we have all kinds of voices in our head. We have those punitive voices, we have the critical voices. We have those voices from our backgrounds, from our childhood. You know, psychology tells us that we probably, on any given day, it's about a 50-50 split in terms of what's in our head. 50% negative, 50% positive. So how do we come down to that place where we are looking for that still small voice, or what Charles Fillmore talked about, the whisper of spirit? There's an example from my life of that, because what Jack Kornfield says, who's a Buddhist writer, he said, you know, those other voices, we need to do this little litmus test that says, what are they grounded in? And Jack Kornfield said the voices that are the ones that we really shouldn't listen to are generally grounded in fear. And he said fear is about our addictions. Fear is about our grandiosity. Fear is about, I don't know anything, but I need to let people think I do know something. Fear is history. Fear is what happened. Fear is I need to be careful. Jack Kornfield said those voices take us to those dark places. So let me give you a quick example. When I was in my 20s, I was in my middle to late 20s, I had developed something in my life where I had these horrible headaches. And these headaches were so bad sometimes that they affected my vision, and sometimes I became nauseous. And I was afraid of them for a long time, but finally I took myself into an emergency room one night. I was in the middle of one of these, and I had someone drive me. I couldn't even drive, and I lost my balance, and I was just sure that I had some brain problem, other than other things that were showing up in my life. So, anyway, so I went in, and the doctor who was on duty decided to have me do some tests. And they did some tests that night, and then they booked me for the next day to come in and do some tests. And it was all this, they hooked things up to me, and it was all this brain stuff. And I was just scared to death. I was just like, I was sure that, this was it, and, I had some major thing going on up there. So anyway, I got through a couple days, and they told me that in the meantime, until I got the results of the tests, I should book an appointment with my own doctor. So I did. And at that particular time, I had a really interesting doctor. He was an older gentleman. I didn't have him for very long because I kind of caught him at the end of his career. He was up in his 70s. Real interesting guy. He started to practice medicine in Canada, worked his way down into the Midwest of the United States. And he was this old family practitioner. He'd deliver babies for like a half a beef and things like that. He had these stories. And so he was an interesting doctor, and I don't know if I've entirely ever had one quite like him, because he was someone that would sit down with you, and he didn't ask very complicated questions, and he really listened. And sometimes there were times where there would just be a bunch of silence in the room, and he wouldn't even be reading anything. He would just sit there, and sometimes he'd put his hand on your shoulder, and he just kind of, and what was interesting too was that he seemed to be more interested in lifestyle questions, as opposed to, is there diabetes in your family and all that sort of thing. He kind of asked you how you lived, So I came in, and I was scared to death, and I told him what happened, and he read the stuff from the hospital, and he was waiting for the results, and he sat there, and he asked me a couple questions, not very many, and he kind of put his hand on my shoulder, and I'm sitting there, and I was so afraid, and he goes, I really think that what happened at the hospital the other night was really a waste of time. I said, well, what are you talking about? The doctor said I could have stuff going on up there, and I'm not going to make it. He goes, well, he says, I don't have the results of the test, but I suspect they're a waste of time. Oh, I mean, do you think what do you think about the other doctor? Well, he was doing the best he could with the circumstances, but I still think it's a waste of time. His hand on my shoulder. Stopped for a moment. I was wearing a shirt with a pocket, and I was smoking at the time, and I had a pack of cigarettes. His hand came down to the pocket, and he went like this. He said, you need to quit smoking. I said, well, yeah, I know I need to quit smoking, but I'm going to die. No, he said, I think you've got some sinus problems. And so, we talked back and forth for a while, and I argued with him because I was convinced that technology in the hospital and everything was right and that my days were numbered. And he was a little more optimistic than that. He just said, you really need to quit smoking. So it turns out that he gave me some medications for my sinuses and really need me to quit smoking. And so I took the medication for my sinuses, but I kept smoking for a long time. You want to know why I kept smoking? Because as Jack Kornfield said, that was a belief system grounded in fear. Those were fear voices, because I was addicted to nicotine. I was addicted to tobacco. And I would have done anything to defend that position because that was fear-based. And all of those voices in my head that reinforce the fact that, yeah, you really need to keep smoking. Until one day, I decided to listen to another voice that said it's probably a good idea to put this drug down. And when I did, I got off the sinus medication. You see, there's a difference in voices. And when Myrtle Fillmore says that we need to be led and to empty out and to commune, you know, I know that sounds really fun. That sounds airy-fairy. That sounds like, oh yes, I need to commune, and it sounds like running through a field of daisies. But what Myrtle Fillmore says is to be willing to really put down that fear-based stuff that we allow to rattle around our heads. So as Charles Fillmore said, we can hear that little whisper. Speaking of Charles Fillmore, he says, a seemingly strange source of knowledge, perhaps a daydream, a distant voice, an echo of something that we have heard and forgotten. Give attention to this unusual and usually faint whispering of spirit. It is a development in individuals of a greater capacity to know themselves and to understand the purpose of creation. That little whisper that we all have. To give ourselves in. To be willing to empty out. To be willing to put down what Jack Kornfield says are the fear-based ideas that keep us stuck in addictions and unhealthy behavior and going in the wrong direction. You see, we in this philosophy believe that while all of the doctrine and all the dogma and all the teaching and all the mystics and all the healers and all the history has a important and profound place in our lives, ultimately, as human beings, our job, our spiritual job, is to tune in the voice within. To open up what's called intuition. Intuition is the cornerstone of our belief system. Each and every one of you, as Becky said earlier, you have a voice within you that is about you, for you. And you know, that voice has been with you for eternity. Wrap your mind around that one. That voice within you is your voice, and it's been there since the dawn of consciousness. I mean, before the Big Bang, it was there. It has traveled with you. It is an ancient voice, a voice of wisdom. It has been with you from lifetime to lifetime. And to empty out and listen to that, and that voice is connected to the one mind of God. That voice has this incredible presence. That voice is a voice of love, a voice of wisdom, a voice of authenticity. I'd like to end today by us doing a prayer together. There's a call and response near you somewhere with a very nice colored piece of paper. I hope you like the color. I did. So I'm going to be reading the bold part, and then you're going to be responding together the part that's under that. And I want to take just a moment to honor Myrtle Fillmore and to honor the captain of the ship. Just take a moment to step up on that bridge and to clear everything else away. Go tell the junior officers to go away. I want to be on this bridge alone. I want to empty out. I want to open up. I want to empty out and I want to open up. And I want to honor this divine presence. The divine presence is a loving and trusted elder.
Because Spirit is personal to me, and I experience it intuitively.
The divine is my teacher and guide.
Because Spirit is personal to me, and I experience it intuitively.
The divine is my loving protector who engages my sorrow and celebrations alike.
Because Spirit is personal to me, and I experience it intuitively.
The divine is my instructor of ancient wisdoms.
Because Spirit is personal to me, and I experience it intuitively.
The divine is the voice I call upon in times of uncertainty.
Because Spirit is personal to me, and I experience it intuitively.
The divine is the healer to whom I turn for right action.
Because Spirit is personal to me, and I experience it intuitively.
The divine is the power of which I give thanks.
Because Spirit is personal to me, and I experience it intuitively.
And so it is.